she collapsed by the fence line. The cowboy lifted her gently and said, "You'll wake up safe now." The fence line ran straight as a promise across the open land, cutting the prairie into two quiet halves. The sky above it was wide and pale, and the wind carried dry grass smell and the last cold breath of last night's storm. Elias Mercer rode slowly, one hand on the reins, the other resting near the saddle horn. He had lived on this ranch since he was a boy, and he knew every post and every dip in the ground the way a man knows the lines in his own palms. The storm had been rough. Lightning had cracked somewhere far out in the flats, and the rain had come down hard enough to turn the creek brown. Moses had waited it out in the barn with the horses and the dogs, listening to the thunder roll like heavy drums. Now the morning was calm again. Almost too calm. The kind of calm that sometimes hid trouble. His horse Copper slowed near the far stretch of fencing. Copper's ears tilted forward, then back, then forward again. The animal gave a low snort and stopped. Elias followed the horse's gaze and saw something near the fence posts. A shape on the ground, half in the shadow of the wire, half in the sun. At first his mind tried to name it as something simple. A bundle of cloth, a fallen tarp, maybe a calf that had wandered too far and gotten stuck. But when he rode closer, the shape didn't look like any of those things. It was a person. A woman lay on her side in the dry grass. Her hair was dark and tangled with dust, but it caught the light strangely, as if tiny sparks lived in it. Her clothing was not the kind anyone wore in the nearby towns. It looked smooth and fitted with faint lines that shimmered like water when the sun hit them. One sleeve was torn, and beneath it her skin showed pale but not sickly, more like moonlight under a thin cloud. Elias swung down from the saddle and moved carefully. Out here you didn't rush up on anything unknown. He knelt beside her and listened. He could hear her breath, shallow but steady. Her eyelids fluttered once, then went still again. Copper shifted behind him. The wind brushed over the grass. The fence wires gave a faint, strange buzz, like a low note from a distant machine. Her pulse was there, but it felt different than he expected. Not weak, just steady in a way that made him think of a clock. Her skin was cool, like she'd been lying out all night. He looked around the flat land. No wagon tracks, no boot prints, no sign of a struggle. The nearest road was miles away. Nobody just ended up here by accident. Elias took a slow breath. He could choose to ride back and call the sheriff in town, but the sheriff would take hours to come, and the woman might not have that long. The storm had already hit her hard, and the morning chill still clung to the air. He slid his coat off his shoulders and wrapped it around her like a blanket. "Easy," he said softly, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "You're not staying out here." Not a gust of wind, not a change in weather. Something quieter. His arms tingled, as if he had picked up a tool that hummed with hidden power. He frowned, but he didn't drop her. She felt light, lighter than she should have, and yet real. Warmth began to return to her cheeks as he held her close. He carried her to Copper and arranged her carefully across the saddle in front of him. Copper flicked his ears but didn't spook. That surprised Elias. Horses didn't like strange things, but Copper stood steady, like he understood the situation more than he should. Elias mounted and started toward home. The ride back stretched long across the prairie. Elias kept his eyes scanning the horizon, watching for any sign of riders or vehicles. The land looked empty, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be watching from far away. The woman shifted once, a small movement back-ended. A faint glow ran along the edge of her clothing, then faded. Elias tightened his jaw. He had heard stories about off-world travelers. The colonies had opened up years ago. People said you could trade a year's worth of cattle for a piece of tech that could heal a broken bone in minutes. Most of it sounded like tall tales told in saloons, but some of it was real. A few visitors came through town now and then. Quiet strangers with money and odd devices. They never stayed long. Still, Elias had never seen anything like this. When the ranch house came into view, he guided Copper into the yard. The dogs barked once, then went quiet, tails low, as if they felt the same strange tension in the air. Elias didn't like that. Carried the woman inside. The house smelled of old wood, coffee grounds, and saddle leather. It was a simple place, a clean place, a place built for hard work and quiet nights. He laid her on the bed in the spare room by the window. The sunlight there was soft and warm, and the curtains moved gently in the breeze. He pulled the thin blanket over her and stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Then the lantern on the small table flickered, though it wasn't lit. The glass trembled as if a tiny vibration ran through it. Elias stared. A faint pulse of light spread along the woman's collar like a slow heartbeat, then disappeared. Elias moved to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. His hands were steady, but his thoughts weren't. He had brought home a stranger who didn't seem fully human, at least not from around here. If she was a traveler, why was she alone? If she was hurt, who hurt her? And why had she ended up on his fence line? He carried the water back and set it on the table near the bed. "If you wake up," he said quietly. "There's water, and there's coffee if you can handle it." He sat in the chair near the door, his rifle resting against the wall beside him. He didn't point it at her. He didn't want to frighten her. But he also wasn't foolish. Out here, you learn to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Time passed slowly. The sunlight shifted across the floor. Outside, the wind picked up and died down again. Elias kept listening for sounds. An engine, hooves, voices. Nothing came. The woman's breathing changed once, becoming a little deeper. Her brows drew together like she was fighting something in her sleep. Then she made a soft sound. Not quite a word, more like a plea. Elias leaned forward slightly. "Hey," he said in a gentle voice. "You're all right. You're safe." Her eyelids fluttered again, and her lips parted. A whisper slipped out, too quiet for him to catch. Her fingers curled in the blanket, and the faint shimmer returned, tracing the lines of her sleeve like tiny streams of starlight. Elias swallowed. This wasn't a fever dream. This was real. A sudden, sharp beep came from nowhere. Elias froze. The sound didn't belong in this old ranch house. It was clean and mechanical, like something from a machine. It repeated once, then stopped. The woman's eyes opened. They were not brown, not blue, not green. They were something else. Deep, bright, like a night sky with hidden colors in it. Her gaze locked on Elias, and for a second her face filled with fear. Her body tensed as if she might jump from the bed, but she was weak, and she seemed to realize it. Elias raised both hands, palms open. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice calm. "You're safe here. I found you by the fence line. You passed out."
The woman stared at him.
Her throat moved as she swallowed. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then toward the door, and back to him. She spoke again, slow and careful. "Where is this? Elias let out a quiet breath, surprised she spoke his language. "My ranch," he said. "Mercer Ranch. You're in the plains, a good ways from town." She blinked, as if trying to understand. Her hand moved toward the collar of her strange clothing, and a faint light responded to her touch, then dimmed. Elias didn't step closer. He stayed where he was, giving her space. "You want me to get a doctor?" he asked. Her lips tightened. "No," she whispered. "No doctor." "They track." That single word made the hair rise on Elias's arms. "They?" he asked. The woman's eyes widened slightly, and she turned her head, listening to something he couldn't hear. Her face went still, like a person holding their breath in a dark room. Then she looked back at Elias, voice barely above air. "You shouldn't have brought me." "Maybe," he said. "But I did. And you're here now." Outside, far above the ranch, something moved across the sky, silent and fast, like a shadow cutting through daylight. It left no sound, but it left a feeling, the way thunder leaves a feeling even before you hear it. The woman closed her eyes for a moment as if she could sense it too. Elias stood, walked to the window, and looked out across the open land. The prairie still looked peaceful. The fences still stood straight. The barn still sat where it always had, but something had changed. He didn't know what the woman was running from. He didn't know what was searching for her. Yet he knew one thing clear as a bell in his chest. Whatever it was, it had crossed into his world. And Elias Mercer did not leave people to face danger alone. The morning light stretched across the ranch house slowly, filling the room with a warm, soft glow. Elias had been awake for hours, sitting in the wooden chair near the bed, watching her. The woman was still asleep, her chest rising and falling steadily, though the faint shimmer in her clothing hinted that she was not entirely human. Elias rubbed his tired eyes and sipped coffee from a chipped mug, listening to the wind move over the prairie. Her eyes opened suddenly, and Elias froze. The color of them was unlike anything he had seen before. Deep, shifting shades, like the sky at night before stars appear. She sat up slowly, wincing slightly, and ran her fingers over the blanket. "You're awake," Elias said softly, moving a little closer but keeping his hands visible. He did not want to frighten her. Out here you learned that fear could make people, and strangers, act in unexpected ways. She looked at him, scanning his face as though trying to place him, to figure out if he was a friend or a threat. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm, almost musical in its tone. "This is my ranch, Mercer Ranch. You passed out by the fence line yesterday." Her eyes widened slightly, and she glanced toward the window. Her gaze lingered on the horizon for a moment, as if listening for something he could not hear. Then she looked back at him. I did not mean to come here." "You were in trouble," Elias said, walking toward a small cabinet to fetch a towel and some water. "I don't ask questions when someone needs help. First you get strong, then we figure out the rest." She took the water he offered, drinking slowly. Her fingers brushed the glass, and faint lines of light traced the rim for a moment, disappearing before Elias could comment. He blinked. He had seen strange things before, travelers from other worlds, off-worlders bringing exotic machines, but this was different. It was subtle, and it made him uneasy. "You're not from around here," he said carefully, sitting down across from her on the edge of the bed. He kept his tone calm, friendly, not pressing. "I can tell. I come from far away, from a place you cannot reach by horse or wagon." Elias raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He had heard rumors about the outer colonies, about travelers who came in silence and sometimes stayed in town only long enough to disappear again. Most of it was exaggerated, tales told in saloons to make city folks believe the frontier was stranger than it seemed. But now, here was someone who made him reconsider all of it. "Do you need to leave?" Elias asked after a moment. "I can help you. We can call someone, get you somewhere safe." "No? If I leave now, they will find me." "They are searching." Her voice was soft, but the words cut the room like a knife.
Elias frowned. "They?"
"Who?" She shook her head slightly, looking away, as if saying more would put him in danger. "I cannot tell. Not yet. But they follow. And if they find me, they will take me." Elias's jaw set. Out here, strangers usually meant business, and business on the frontier could turn deadly fast. But this was different. She did not seem threatening. He seemed afraid, vulnerable. And she had come to him. That meant something. "You'll stay here," he said firmly, "until you are ready to move. Until you know who you can trust." Her eyes met his again. There was something in her gaze. Relief, curiosity, and the faintest shadow of fear. "Thank you," she whispered. For a long moment they sat quietly. Outside, the wind stirred the tall grass. The ranch dogs padded around the barn, keeping watch. Elias thought about the fences, the fields, the barns, the horses, everything he knew by heart. And then he realized something. His quiet life had just changed, forever. The day moved slowly. She stayed in the house, resting on the bed or sitting by the window. Elias went about his work, checking fences, feeding the horses, moving quietly around the ranch. He kept glances toward her, making sure she had what she needed, but he did not crowd her. By midday, she finally spoke again. "I need to move carefully. They can track me through devices, signals, things you do not know." Elias nodded. "I've been around long enough to know the land." "We'll use that. Nothing comes here without leaving a trace I can follow. You're safe while you stay here." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I did not expect safety." He shrugged lightly. "Not many people do, especially out here. But that's why some of us live this way. Out here, you learn to protect yourself, and sometimes you protect others too." The afternoon sun dropped lower. She moved to the porch, watching the horizon as Elias worked on repairing a broken post. The breeze lifted her hair, and the faint shimmer returned along her sleeve as the sunlight caught it. Suddenly a shadow crossed the land beyond the barn. Elias froze, squinting toward the horizon. It moved fast, too fast to be a person, too deliberate to be a bird. His heart beat faster, but he stayed calm. Years on the frontier had taught him that fear could be controlled if action came first. "Something's coming," he said, more to himself than to her. She looked up at him. Her expression was tense but not panicked. "They are near." Elias straightened and walked toward her. "Stay inside," he said firmly. "Do not step outside until I tell you it is safe." I understand." He moved back toward the barn and grabbed his rifle. Not to threaten her, but to be ready for whoever was approaching. Out here, it was easy to prepare, and it was always better to be ready. The shadow moved closer. Elias could make out shapes now, 3 figures, approaching steadily. They moved like they knew exactly where they were going, almost like they were guided by something invisible. He slowed his breath and analyzed the terrain. The fence line, the open field, the barn, they would all become obstacles or advantages, depending on how he used them. He walked back to her, keeping calm. "You're safe. They may try to scare you, but stay quiet." "Let me handle it." Her eyes held a hint of worry. "I cannot fight," she said softly. "You don't have to," Elias replied. "I've faced worse than this on my own. You just stay close, stay quiet." As they moved toward the house, Elias explained quickly, "We'll use the barn and the fences to our advantage. The open field works for me and the shadows give cover. Stay inside. Keep low." She nodded, listening carefully. Every word, every movement, she absorbed as though it mattered more than her own life, which, in truth, it did. The figures reached the edge of the property. Elias watched them from the porch roof, crouched low, rifle ready. They did not rush, did not shout. They stepped carefully, scanning the land, scanning the house. Elias felt their attention shift when the woman moved slightly near the window. He signaled with his hand. "Stay." She obeyed. For minutes the visitors paused, then split into two groups. One moved around the barn while the other approached the fence line slowly. Elias counted their steps, their gestures, their weapons, or lack thereof. Everything looked calm, organized, but he could feel tension radiating from them. They were not here to talk. They were here to take her. Elias took a deep breath. This was no longer about fences or fields. This was about keeping someone alive who had no one else to protect her. He adjusted his stance, checked the rifle, and waited. And in that quiet, tense moment, he realized something he had not expected. He did not just want to protect the stranger from the unknown. He wanted her to trust him, to understand that here, in this open, harsh, quiet land, someone would stand between her and danger, no matter what came. The wind picked up again, whispering through the tall grass. The prairie seemed endless. The visitors' figures moved with precision, but Elias was ready, and somewhere deep inside he knew this day would change everything, not just for her, but for him too. She glanced at him again, her eyes wide but steady. He nodded. "You're safe," he repeated, softer this time, letting the words sink into both of them. The sun dropped lower behind the hills and the shadows lengthened. The first part of the confrontation was only beginning. Out here, on the edge of the plains, on the fence line where the storm had dropped her, Elias Mercer was ready to fight, not for land, not for livestock, but for the life of someone who had no one else, and she understood that. In silence they both waited, each for what would come next, each aware that the wide open prairie could hide both danger and hope in equal measure. The shadows grew longer as the sun sank behind the distant hills, turning the prairie into shades of orange and gray. Elias Mercer crouched behind the barn, keeping his rifle steady. His eyes scanned every movement beyond the fence line, counting each step, each flicker of light. Copper grazed quietly nearby, ears flicking toward every sound, sensing tension that humans could not. The woman, Lyra, stayed inside the house, pressed close to the floor. Her eyes peeked through the window blinds, wide and alert. She had not spoken since Elias told her to stay quiet, but her body language spoke volumes. Fear, caution, and a strange determination. The first of the visitors moved slowly across the field, their figures blending with the growing darkness. They were precise, almost mechanical, but not without hesitation. Elias could feel it, hesitation that came from unfamiliar terrain. Out here, the land was his advantage. He knew every dip, every rise, every shadow the setting sun would cast. "They're careful," Elias muttered under his breath. "Not stupid, but careful won't save them." He adjusted his grip on the rifle and shifted slightly, moving into better cover behind the barn post. Each visitor carried a device strapped to their wrist, glowing faintly with pale blue light. He didn't know what it did, but he could tell it tracked something, probably Lyra. Lyra watched, tense. Her fingers brushed the edge of the windowsill, and a faint shimmer of light traced along her sleeve. She whispered under her breath in a language Elias did not understand. The glow pulsed briefly in response, then faded. Elias nodded once, silently. She had power, strange power, but it could not replace strategy. The visitors might have advanced tech, but he had patience, knowledge of the land, and the will to protect. The first visitor reached the fence line. He paused, crouching slightly, scanning the area with a small device in hand. Elias held his breath, waiting. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the faint hum of distant energy. Elias could feel his pulse quicken. He did not like unnecessary risks, but he also did not back down. This was not just his ranch anymore. It was now a battlefield, a place where he would stand between the unknown and someone who had nowhere else to go. One visitor climbed over the fence slowly, moving toward the house. Elias aimed carefully not to harm unless absolutely necessary. The rifle felt familiar in his hands, an extension of his body, a tool honed by years of frontier work. He counted to 3, then adjusted his stance. Another visitor split away, moving around the barn, likely to circle back and block any escape. Elias's mind raced. If they coordinated perfectly, he could be surrounded before he knew it, but he had the advantage of observation and patience. He had watched them for hours, learned their rhythm, and now he would act. "Stay low," he whispered to himself, thinking of Lyra inside. "Don't make a sound." The visitor near the barn reached the corner, crouched behind a post, and activated a small light. The beam swept across the ground. Elias held his breath. 1 step, 2 steps, then a small rock shifted under the visitor's foot, making a faint noise. Elias knew he had seconds. He pressed his body closer to the barn, aiming carefully. The sound startled the visitor slightly. He looked up, and in that moment, Elias acted. A sharp crack echoed across the prairie. The visitor froze, then stumbled back as a small projectile hit near his feet. It was not lethal, just enough to warn. Elias did not aim to kill, only to protect. The other visitor paused, scanning the barn with a device, now aware of unexpected resistance. Inside, Lyra's eyes widened. She realized Elias was not bluffing. His precision, his calm, his presence, all of it told her that this man could protect her if she let him. Her pulse steadied, and she focused, letting her powers remain subtle, only shimmering faintly along her clothing when she breathed. The visitor near the fence shifted slightly, now unsure of his position. He gestured to the other. Elias watched their coordination falter. Out here, technology was only as good as the user's knowledge of the land. He knew the next moves before they even made them. "Not tonight," he whispered, crouching lower. The visitor near the barn tried to circle back, moving slowly along the shadow of the building. Elias adjusted his aim, waiting for the right moment. Another crack. A precise shot landing near the visitor's feet forced him to stop. Panic flickered briefly in his eyes. He took a step back, reevaluating the situation. Meanwhile, Lyra stood quietly by the window, focusing. Her fingers traced patterns in the air, and the faint shimmer along her sleeve pulsed. The visitor closest to her paused, sensing something unfamiliar. Elias nodded subtly. Her presence alone was affecting them, though she had yet to act openly. The first visitor, realizing the house was guarded and the barn covered, called quietly to the others. Elias could not hear their words, but the tone told him enough. Frustration, caution, and uncertainty. They were not used to being resisted, especially not by a single man on a frontier ranch. Elias stayed calm. He could see every step they took, every gesture. The sun had now nearly set, leaving long shadows that twisted and danced across the field. The light played tricks on the eyes, and he used it to his advantage, blending into the darkness near the barn. Then, the visitor closest to the house moved too close to the porch, unaware of Lyra's subtle power. Elias's instincts flared. He jumped from his hiding spot, pushing the visitor away from the building, using a controlled force from the rifle's recoil. The man stumbled, surprised and unprepared. Inside, Lyra let out a quiet breath of relief. She realized Elias was not just a man. He was a protector who understood the land, understood timing, and understood risk. Her respect and trust in him grew. The other visitor, seeing his companion falter, hesitated. Elias did not let the hesitation go unused. He moved carefully, positioning himself between them and the house. The shadows offered cover, and the ground was familiar under his boots. He could predict their moves before they even happened. Minutes passed, each one stretching long, heavy with tension. The visitors tried to regroup, moving cautiously, but Elias anticipated each action. A misplaced foot, a slight turn of the wrist, and he was there, subtly influencing their choices with precise warnings and positioning. Lyra watched, fascinated. She had fled, hidden, and survived with technology, power, and skill, but she had never met anyone like Elias. He was simple, calm, patient, and yet fierce when needed. He moved without fear, controlled without arrogance, and protected without hesitation. The visitors finally realized that the house could not be breached tonight. Their coordination had faltered, the terrain favored Elias, and Lyra's subtle powers created an uncertainty they could not measure. They stepped back slowly, regrouping their glowing devices, flickering briefly. Elias did not relax yet. He stayed crouched near the barn, eyes on every shadow. The visitors communicated quietly among themselves, then retreated to the edge of the prairie, keeping watch but not advancing further. Inside, Lyra finally allowed herself to breathe fully. She sank onto the floor, her body trembling slightly from tension. Elias approached cautiously, lowering his rifle, keeping his voice calm. "You're safe," he said quietly, kneeling beside her. "They're gone for now." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear, gratitude, and something else. Trust. "I did not know someone could protect me like this," she said softly. Elias shrugged, a small, tired smile on his face. "Out here, you learn to protect what's important. Sometimes it's cattle, sometimes it's land, sometimes it's someone who has nowhere else to go." She nodded, leaning back against the wall, letting the tension leave her shoulders slowly. The shimmer along her sleeve dimmed, her powers resting for now. Outside, the prairie was quiet again. The sun had set completely, leaving the world in deep twilight. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the smell of dust, earth, and distant rain. Elias looked out the window, scanning the horizon. The visitors were gone, at least for the night, but he knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, they might come back, he said softly, mostly to himself. "And we'll be ready." Lyra watched him, her eyes steady. She realized that tonight had shown her more than safety. It had shown her someone she could trust, someone who understood courage, not through power, but through calm, careful action. The night deepened, stars appearing slowly in the clear prairie sky. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, but the tension lingered in the air like a shadow that would not fade. Elias and Lyra sat together, both alert, both aware that the day had changed everything. For the first time since arriving on this strange land, Lyra felt something she had not expected: hope. And Elias, watching the stars, felt a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. This night had been more than survival. It had been a test, a warning, and a beginning. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, wide and open, filled with possibilities and dangers alike. And somewhere out there, beyond the hills, the visitors would return. But Elias Mercer would be ready. And Lyra would stand beside him, not just as someone to protect, but as someone whose presence made the unknown less frightening. They were no longer just a man and a stranger. And the prairie, with all its wind, dust, and shadows, had just begun to witness the story of their fight, their trust, and the bond that would grow stronger with each passing day. The night was quiet over the Mercer ranch, but the stars above seemed unusually bright, as if they were watching. Elias sat near the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the horizon, though the visitors were gone. Copper lay at his feet, ears flicking at every sound. Inside, Lyra rested on the floor, leaning against the wall, her eyes still alert. The events of the day had left them both exhausted, yet neither could sleep fully. "Do you always carry a rifle this close?" Lyra asked quietly, her voice soft in the night. Elias gave a small smile, keeping his eyes on the prairie. "Out here, you learn to be ready for anything, mostly for storms, stray cattle, or someone who doesn't understand boundaries. But sometimes, you're ready for strangers too." She nodded slowly, looking down at her hands. Faint traces of light shimmered along her sleeves with every movement. "I didn't mean for them to follow me here," she whispered. "I thought I could hide." Her voice trailed off. "You're safe now," Elias said firmly. "For tonight, at least. We'll figure out the rest in the morning."
Lyra looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the lantern light.
"Why help me? You don't even know me." Elias shrugged, leaning back slightly. "Doesn't matter. Someone needed help. That's reason enough out here." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind move through the tall prairie grass. Night insects buzzed softly, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Elias finally stood, stretching his back. "I'll check the fences one more time. Make sure nothing's broken from the storm or their visit," he said. Lyra nodded, but she didn't move. She stayed on the porch, watching him leave, almost as if she were learning, observing the rhythm of the ranch, trying to understand the strange life she had landed in. As Elias walked along the fence line, he thought about the day's events. The visitors had not expected resistance. They were precise advanced, yet they faltered when met with patience, knowledge of the land, and calculated action. Out here, technology was only useful if you understood the terrain, and Elias did. When he returned, Lyra had moved inside the house, kneeling by the lantern. She looked up as he entered. "They will return," she said quietly. "Sooner or later." Elias nodded, setting his rifle against the wall. "Then we'll be ready. We use the land, the fences, and your abilities." if you want to. Her eyes met his, steady now. I do, she said softly. I will not hide forever. The next morning the sun rose slowly, painting the prairie with gold and orange. Elias had slept in the chair near the window, keeping one eye open. Copper had slept on the porch, alert even in dreams. Lyra had slept a little more soundly, though the glow along her sleeves had pulsed faintly in the dark, as if her body never fully rested. Elias stirred first, making breakfast while keeping an ear on the wind outside. Lyra watched quietly, observing the small routines of a life she had never known, fetching water, lighting the stove, checking the barn. She had spent her life in strange advanced worlds, but this simplicity fascinated her. There was power in routine and patience in knowing your land. When breakfast was ready, Elias set a plate for her. Eat, he said. You need strength for whatever comes. She took the plate, still quiet, studying him as he ate. Then she spoke, her voice calm but curious. Your world, it is simple, but there is strength here. Elias looked at her, raising an eyebrow. Strength isn't always in machines or power suits. Sometimes it's in patience, in knowing what to do before it's too late, and sometimes it's knowing who to protect. She nodded slowly. Her hands traced the edge of the table, and faint lines of light shimmered along her sleeve again. Elias noticed but did not comment. He had learned today that her abilities were powerful, subtle, and unpredictable. After breakfast, they began preparing the ranch. Elias taught her how to move quietly, how to use the shadows to her advantage, how to listen to the prairie. Her senses were sharp, far sharper than his, but she lacked knowledge of the land. He showed her dips in the ground, soft patches of grass, and safe places behind fences. By midday, she was moving confidently, crouching behind posts, scanning the horizon. Elias watched her from a distance, impressed by her quick learning. She had fled across galaxies, survived advanced tracking systems, and yet she was eager to learn simple skills he had practiced for years. Late afternoon brought movement. 3 figures appeared beyond the hills again. The visitors had returned, cautious but determined. Elias didn't panic. He had Lyra now. He had the land, and he had patience. Stay inside, he whispered to her, crouching behind the barn. Watch, learn, and only act if I signal. She nodded, watching him. He could see the tension leave her slightly. Trust had grown between them, and that trust would be key. The first visitor approached the fence line, activating a glowing device on his wrist. Elias waited, observing. The second visitor moved around the barn, scanning for possible escape routes. The third stayed slightly behind, providing cover. Their precision was clear, but their hesitation was evident. Elias moved carefully, using shadows and dips in the land. He placed a few small obstacles, rocks, logs, even a broken gatepost, to slow their approach. Every step they took was monitored, every movement predicted. Lyra watched from the window, understanding now how Elias controlled the battlefield. She could see the subtle shifts, the calculated choices, and she began to mimic them, subtly influencing the shadows with her light. Faint, but noticeable to the approaching visitors. The first visitor stepped too close to the barn. Elias stepped from his cover, rifle raised, but not aimed directly. The visitor froze. Elias's voice was calm but firm. Back away. The visitor hesitated, unsure, then signaled to the others. Elias saw their coordination falter. Lyra's subtle influence, her presence, her light, was affecting them. They could not predict what they could not measure. Elias used that hesitation. He moved closer, keeping low, placing himself between the visitors and the house. Another crack of a small projectile near their feet forced them back. Inside, Lyra's eyes widened, but she did not move. She understood now. Elias was not just strong, he was precise, patient, and unyielding. Her trust in him deepened. Minutes passed in tense silence. The visitors regrouped at the edge of the prairie, their glowing devices flickering. They did not advance further. Elias stayed alert, but he lowered his stance slightly, signaling Lyra that the immediate danger had passed. She exhaled quietly, relief washing over her. You are remarkable, she said softly. Elias shook his head, a faint smile on his face. I do what I must. Out here, it's not about bravery. It's about survival, and sometimes protecting someone who has nowhere else to go. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. They checked the fences, fed the animals, and repaired what had been damaged in the storm. Lyra followed Elias, moving confidently now, learning how to navigate the land. As evening fell, they sat together on the porch, watching the prairie stretch endlessly under the fading sun. Lyra's eyes followed the horizon, then returned to Elias. I did not expect safety to feel like this, she said. Elias tipped his hat, smiling faintly. Safety is simple. Most people make it complicated. Out here, it's just land, wind, and knowing you're not alone. She leaned back, feeling the cool breeze on her face. For the first time since fleeing across worlds, she felt calm. The danger was still out there, but tonight it felt distant. Elias watched the stars appear one by one. Tomorrow we'll prepare more. If they return, we'll be ready. She nodded, her hand brushing lightly against his. The faint shimmer along her sleeve pulsed briefly, a silent acknowledgement. They did not speak much more. Words were unnecessary. Trust had been built through action, patience, and presence. Night fell completely. The prairie was silent, except for distant animals and the wind through the grass. Elias and Lyra sat together, alert but at ease. The visitors were out there, somewhere beyond the hills, but the ranch, the land, and each other were theirs tonight. And for the first time since arriving, Lyra felt not just safety, but belonging. Elias looked at her, then toward the prairie. The vast open land had taught him patience, courage, and protection. Now it had given him a companion he could trust, someone who would stand beside him when needed, someone whose strength complemented his own. The night stretched on, deep and full of stars. Somewhere beyond the horizon the visitors waited, planning, watching. But here, on the Mercer Ranch, two lives had intertwined, a cowboy who understood the land and a traveler from distant stars. Together, they would face whatever came next, ready, patient, and strong. And in the quiet prairie night, that was enough.